Everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really crucial topic in obstetrics, amniotic fluid. It's so much more than just the water surrounding the baby. You should think of it as a dynamic, living environment that basically acts as a vital sign for fetal health. So let's break down what it is, and more importantly, what it tells us. So here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the basics. What is this fluid? Where does it come from? Then, we'll look at how we actually measure it in the clinic. After that, we'll get into the two big problems, polyhydramnios, which is too much fluid, and oligohydramnios, which is too little. And we'll wrap it all up by talking about management and complications.
All right, let's jump right in with the fundamentals. See, before we can understand what goes wrong, we first have to have a crystal clear idea of how it's all supposed to work. Let's look at the basic physiology.
So what exactly is this fluid? Well, yes, it's a protective cushion, but it is so much more than that. It gives the fetus room to move around, which is absolutely essential for developing muscles and bones, and crucially, it plays a massive role in lung maturation. The baby literally breathes this fluid in and out to get the lungs ready. It really is a complete life support system.
Now this is super interesting. The source of the fluid actually changes as the pregnancy goes on. In the very beginning, in the first trimester, it's basically just filtered fluid from the mother's own plasma. Then, up to about 20 weeks, it also seeps across the fetus's skin. But here's the big switch. After 20 weeks, the number one primary source becomes fetal urine.
So how is the volume kept just right? Well, it's all about a beautifully simple in and out balance. The main in is fetal urine production, and believe it or not, that's about a whole liter a day towards the end. The main out is fetal swallowing. So, production in, removal out. And this right here is the key to understanding all the pathology. If there's any problem with the baby's kidneys or with its ability to swallow, this whole system gets thrown off balance.
Okay, let's get practical. We know what it is, but how do we actually see it and measure it in a patient? Well, our main tool for this, of course, is the ultrasound.
All right, pay attention. This is a very important practical skill you need to know. To measure the amniotic fluid index, or AFI, we follow 4 simple steps. First, you mentally divide the uterus into 4 quadrants. Then, in each quadrant, you find the deepest pocket of fluid and measure it vertically. Finally, you just add those 4 numbers together, and that total sum, in centimeters, is your AFI. Simple as that.
And here's a great visual of exactly what we were just talking about. You can see the uterus is split into 4 parts, and we're taking those 4 measurements, A, B, C, and D. You add them up, and that gives you the AFI. Just so you know, a normal AFI is anything between 5 and 24 centimeters.
So AFI is most common, but is it the only way? Nope. There's another method called the single deepest pocket, or STP. Now, why do we need 2? This is a classic exam question, so listen up. You cannot use AFI in a twin pregnancy. It just doesn't work. For twins, you absolutely have to use the STP method to measure the fluid in each sac separately. Remember that.
Okay, so we know how to measure it. Now let's talk about what happens when those numbers are off. We'll start with the first big problem, polyhydramnios. This is, quite simply, the condition of having way too much amniotic fluid.
Okay, guys, this table is pure gold for your exams. It's very high yield. Let's walk through it. For polyhydramnios, the cutoff is an AFI of 25 or more. For oligo, it's an AFI of less than 5. Now, notice this. For both conditions, the most common cause is actually idiopathic, meaning we often don't find a reason. But when there is a clear fetal cause, remember this simple link. Polyhydramnios often goes with GIT problems because the baby can't swallow. And oligohydramnios usually points to renal or kidney problems because the baby can't produce urine.
So let's break down the big causes of polyhydramnios. First up, maternal diabetes. This is a classic one. High sugar in the mother leads to high sugar in the baby, which makes the baby pee a lot. So, more fluid. Second, you have fetal anomalies that stop the baby from swallowing. This goes right back to our in and out principle. If there's a blockage in the esophagus or duodenum or a problem like anencephaly, the fluid just can't go down. It builds up and up.
And here we have a classic image, a spotter you absolutely have to know for your exams. This is the double bubble sign on an ultrasound. When you see this, you should immediately think duodenal atresia. That means there's a blockage, which means the baby can't swallow properly, which means, you guessed it, polyhydramnios.
All right, let's flip the coin and talk about the other extreme, oligohydramnios. This is when there's too little fluid. And honestly, from a clinical standpoint, this one often worries us a bit more than too much fluid.
Now, this is a super important concept to grasp. How does a problem with the placenta lead to low fluid? Well, it's a chain reaction. It starts with uteroplacental insufficiency, or UPI. The placenta isn't working well. The fetus is smart, so it redirects blood flow to protect its most important organ, the brain. We call this the brain sparing effect. But the trade-off is that less blood goes to other places, like the kidneys. Less blood to the kidneys means less urine gets made, and that leads directly to oligohydramnios. When you think about the causes of oligo, it's helpful to put them into two main buckets. Either the baby isn't making enough fluid, or the fluid is leaking out. Reduced production could be from kidney problems or that UPI we just talked about. Increased loss is the classic PPROM, preterm prelabor rupture of membranes, or the water breaking early. Oh, and don't forget, certain drugs, especially ACE inhibitors, can also cause it.
Okay, another classic ultrasound image for you. See this? It looks just like a keyhole, right? Well, this is the keyhole sign. This tells you there's a blockage downstream in the baby's urinary tract, like posterior urethral valves. So urine is being made by the kidneys, but it's getting trapped in the bladder and can't get out. And that, of course, causes severe oligohydramnios.
So we've found that the fluid is too high or too low. Great. The real question for us as clinicians is, what are we going to do about it? Let's talk about management and what we're trying to prevent.
A huge part of managing these cases comes down to one big decision: when to deliver the baby. And the general thinking is pretty straightforward. If it's an uncomplicated case and the baby seems otherwise healthy, we can aim to induce labor at 39 weeks. But if there are any other red flags, like the baby isn't growing well or there are signs of distress, we're going to think about delivering earlier, typically around 37 weeks.
With too much fluid, you should think of the uterus like an overinflated balloon. What happens? It gets stretched thin, it becomes irritable, and that can trigger preterm labor. And when the water breaks, it's not a trickle, it's a flood. That sudden gush of fluid can wash the umbilical cord out ahead of the baby, which is a cord prolapse, a true obstetrical emergency. Then, after delivery, that overstretched uterus might not contract down properly, leading to postpartum hemorrhage.
Now, the complications with too little fluid are, frankly, quite scary. It's all about compression and a lack of space. The baby needs to practice breathe the fluid to develop its lungs. With no fluid, you can get underdeveloped lungs or pulmonary hypoplasia. That fluid cushion is also gone, so the umbilical cord can get easily squashed, cutting off oxygen. And finally, that constant compression can even cause physical deformities like a club foot.
And this really says it all. The volume of amniotic fluid is not just some random number we measure on an ultrasound. You have to think of it as a powerful indicator of the baby's well-being. When it's too high or too low, that's a massive red flag telling us that something is wrong, and it's our job to investigate and to act.
All right, to finish up, here's a quick clinical challenge to put it all together. A patient with poorly controlled diabetes comes in. Her AFI is 28. First question, what's the mechanism? And second, what's the immediate life-threatening risk you're most worried about the moment her membranes rupture? Thinking through that scenario connects the cause directly to the complication.